And here we go.
Yeah.
All right, the recording is in progress. This is our first session of 2026, and we're still in roaming free inside the cage. And we're going to start back and do one paragraph from page, what would that be, 27 in Roman numerals, XXVII. So go back just so we can, as we start a new section and a new chapter, just helps us to get oriented. Um, Welcome back, everybody, for the new year. And before we start, and I think it's probably been long enough that there probably won't be any thoughts, but is there anything that you want to talk about from whenever it was we last met? Any old business? Anything that you wasn't developed completely, fully to your expectation? Yeah, I didn't think so. It's been too long. All right. Then let's start afresh with some new material. Okay. Hopefully William will be dropping in here in a minute. It's kind of weird not having him. Okay, so page 27, Roman numeral 27. So this is back into the introduction. That last paragraph where he's introducing the shape, and the structure of the book. And since we're entering this new section, which is going to be the trunk of the tree, I don't know if you remember him using a tree as a metaphor for the shape of his book, but here we go. Since I have just called the Enneagram a map, and remember he called it a map of the personality. Since I've just called the Enneagram a map, it probably makes sense to give you a map of where we are going. Imagine the map in the shape of a tree. We will travel up the tree, starting at the bottom. Part one, the roots, describes two underlying components of the structure of personality or type, the ways we sort and process experience, and the fundamental kinds of energy we use in the process. So now if you remember now, this is the section that we just finished, section one. And he talked about these two underlying components of the structure of personality or type. The ways we sort and process experience. That's the three centers of experience. Remember, we're going to process through our body, our mind, or our heart. And Gail, are you signaling me for something? You're
So
muted.
he knows what
Let
page
William know
we're
where
on.
we're at.
I have said several times.
No, not for William, though.
Oh, William. Oh, it doesn't matter if William's tracking with us.
What page are we on?
I didn't even see you,
Oh,
William. I was so focused
27.
on what I was doing, except that Gail was sitting there doing gymnastics in front of me. We're on Roman numeral 27, XXVII.
Okay.
Okay. So, anyways, we've got these two components. So, the way that we sort and process experience. So, that's the centers of experience he was talking about. Either we process through the body, the heart, or the mind. And we went through that. And we tried to figure out where we all stood on that. And then the second are the fundamental kinds of energy we use in the process of sorting our experiences, right? And those are the three energies, the yin, the yang, and the reconciling energy. And so we talked about each of us where we fell on the three centers of experience and also the three types of energy. So a basic familiarity with these two components will help you to reach a deeper awareness of your individual way of experiencing life and the aspect of life energy that you primarily rely on as you do. So hopefully that's making things clear. Remember, we were able to overlay the three type centers of experience and the three energies, and it would land pretty much, I think it was 80, we were about 85% to 90% right on our Enneatype, the one that we were probably most likely to accept as our Enneatype anyway. And so the whole purpose of reading part one is to ask yourself, which of these ways of experiencing life is my own? And which of these energies is the one I most often use? Your answers will provide you with an elementary basis for recognizing your own type as well as that of others. Now, part two, this is the part we're going into right now. The trunk begins by explaining the function type plays in daily life, the function that type plays in daily life. It also tells you how to recognize when type is getting active or going on automatic pilot. So that's going to be a big part of what he's going to be talking about in this first section. How do you know when your type is going active, right? That way of dealing with life and the moment and the challenge that you're facing. How do you know when the type is getting active or going on autopilot? Lastly, it gives you some preliminary ideas about what to do when that happens. Part 3, the canopy, takes each type in detail, laying out each type's native manner of expressing original nature or essence and its initial wounding and subsequent development. Following a description of how each type develops is a section on the path of healing for each type, the type's point of avoidance, its vice and virtue, and the place where they begin transforming one into another, called the pivot of Tao. As each type is presented, the pivot of Tao notion will become clearer, so that by the time all 9 types have been discussed, you will have a fairly complete idea of how to access it for yourself. Part 4 of the book is called the Cosmic Tree. The first chapter of this part looks at the Enneagram as an archetype of the human condition, and the second describes 4 basic principles of spiritual work, regardless of type. Okay. Any thoughts about any of that? Triggering your memories? Let's fast forward to page 35. Arabic numerals this time. So this is part 2, the trunk of the tree. The self-maintaining nature of type. The self-maintaining nature of type. He's going to talk about how type is amazingly stable throughout our lifetimes, to the point that we think that we're permanently labeled, with one of those indelible Sharpies. But they are relatively stable. There's a reason for that. But that doesn't mean that we can't transcend them. We can't spiritually evolve. In the following chapter, we will take a small but important step toward gaining freedom to roam freely within our type, as we describe how type manifests itself in daily life, what it feels like to bump into our type in action. I like the way he put that. And what we can do to begin liberating ourselves from its automatic grip. So you can see just by the language that he chooses, both in the introduction that we read and now this, that what's going on with our Enneatype is largely unconscious. When he says what it feels like to bump into our type in action, you can see that this isn't something that we're aware of. This isn't something that we're conscious of. This is something that we're going to bump into. As we become more and more aware of ourselves, our centers of experience, our types of energy that we use, our Enneatype, as far as we know it, then we're going to be more and more likely to start bumping into it. We're going to start to see it in action. And then what we can begin to do to liberate ourselves from its automatic grip. And so there's that idea of the automatic grip. If we're not aware, those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. That type of idea, same thing here. If we're not aware of what's going on in our unconscious, then we're just going to be playing out the same pre-programmed and predetermined loop of thought and behavior patterns. This is what we're trying to overcome. This is what the spiritual journey is all about. It's becoming aware of what forces are driving us. If we're going to overcome sin in the classic religious sense, it's really overcoming these pre-programmed patterns that keep us missing the mark of who we could be and who we can be in terms of relationship and so on and so forth. So I like the language that he's using because it's reinforcing without hitting you over the head that we're dealing with these unconscious forces. Any thoughts there? Comments? Okay, turning the page, chapter 3, Enneatype as protector of the ego. Okay, so that's got to give you a few clues about what's going on, right? Enneatype as protector of the ego. Now let's remember what he said in the introduction back on page 27. The three tasks that he set himself in this section 2, the trunk of the book. The first one is how Enneatype functions in daily life. He wants to show us that. He also wants to show us how to recognize when our type is going active, when it becomes active in terms of the way that we're dealing with something. And when we're actually on autopilot, starting to break through that asleepness, that autopilot that is governing our thought and behavior patterns until we become aware enough to see them in action. So we got to recognize the type when it's in action and recognize when we're going on autopilot. And then the third task of this section is what to do when that happens. How can we counter that? How can we break through? Sounds like there's going to be a little CBT going on here, right? As we try to break through these embedded thought and behavior patterns. Okay, so Enneatype is protector of the ego. The trunk is designed to protect, preserve, and support the living tree. From the outside, it is hard and firm, unchanging with the seasons, and resistant to pressures to bend in new directions. Yet on the inside, it is a busy, mostly liquid environment, perpetually in motion. It constantly mediates food and energy between the roots and the foliage. Your Enneatype is like a trunk. It supports and preserves your egoic existence as this particular me. It is resistant to change. You'll find it difficult to design new fruits and flowers for it to produce. But it also contains hidden energies from deep within that you very much need in order to reconnect to your essential roots. So it's not a good idea to try to demolish your Enneatype. In this chapter, we will take a look at the first tasks of spiritual development once you begin to incorporate the Enneagram into your practice. Let us begin with what type feels like. Okay, stopping there for a second. Any initial thoughts, reactions? Want to break a few things down. So he's extending the metaphor of the tree here. And he's going to talk about Enneatype as being the analog to the trunk of a tree. On the outside, it's hard, it's firm, it's resistant to change, it doesn't bend. Yet on the inside, liquid, perpetually in motion, constantly mediating energy, between the roots and the branches and the leaves. So your Enneatype is like a trunk. It supports and preserves your egoic existence as this particular me. Okay, so now we got to remember what he was talking about there in terms of me. Remember, he distinguished between me and I. Me was the personality. Me was the part of ourselves that we can quantify. We can talk about. We can talk about our roles that we play. We can talk about our accomplishments. We can talk about our attributes as a person, the attributes of our personality. Anything that we can talk about, anything that we can describe goes into the content, goes into the me part. That's in contrast to the I. The I can't be described. The I is that deeper self that can only be experienced. But as soon as we visualize it, as soon as we name it, as soon as we describe it in any way, then we've objectified it and it's turned into me. It's turned into content. And we're no longer experiencing that deep, true self. So the Enneatype is like a trunk that is supporting and preserving your egoic existence as this particular me. The Enneatype is supporting that view of yourself, let's say. It is resistant to change. You will find it difficult to design new fruits and flowers for it to produce. But it also contains hidden energies from deep within that you very much need in order to reconnect to your essential roots. So the Enneatype is a pro and a con. But I think the main thing that we can take away from this is that it's not really under our direct control. We can't just design new fruits and flowers for the trunk to produce. We can't bend it to our will and make it do what we want it to do. It's kind of like step one in the 12 steps of AA. First thing we need to do is admit our powerlessness over this process. There's certain things that we can do by a force of will, and there's things that we can't. And so this is part of what we can't control directly. But we're going to find workarounds. We're going to find indirect ways to be able to work past the stiff trunk of our Enneatype. So it's not a good idea to try to demolish your Enneatype because it's got energies that we need. So this is just like the shadow. Remember when we talked, we did the shadow book, Owning Your Shadow, Robert A. Johnson. It's like the shadow. The shadow is those attributes, those energies in ourselves that we repress starting in early childhood. Whatever it is that is getting us reward and getting us approval and connection as children, that is what we project. Anything that is getting us punished and spanked and limited in any way, those are the things that we learn to repress so we can fit in, so we can work to advantage. And these are all the beginnings of those unconscious programs that are going to be running into adulthood until we become aware enough to be able to start to dismantle them. So it's not a good idea to demolish your Enneatype any more than it is to continue to deny your shadow or to just be unaware of your shadow. The whole idea of doing shadow work is to reintegrate everything that's in there. Those that are beneficial, that may have been repressed, now we can bring them out. We can set them free. We can let them start to work for us. And those that are always antisocial and harmful, then we need to find ways to dissipate those in which they do no harm. But still, we have to own the whole thing. And it's going to be the same thing here. So we're not trying to demolish the Enneatype in terms of our spiritual growth. We're not trying to push it aside, repress it, or demolish it. We're trying to incorporate it. So it's kind of the opposite in that respect. So in this chapter, we'll take a look at the first tasks of spiritual development once you begin to incorporate the Enneagram into your practice. And we're going to begin with what type feels like. And I think that's a great approach, what type feels like. I think I've told some of you this story before, but a couple lifetimes ago when I was taking vocal lessons, voice lessons from a vocal coach, he was telling me that the muscles that you as a vocalist are trying to work with and control and train are inside of you. You can't see them. You know, it's not like learning to type where you can look at your fingers and you can see the keyboard and at least you can help yourself visually along. Everything's inside you and you can't do that. So how in the world can you train yourself to do something with your vocal folds or with your larynx when you can't see what it is you're doing and you don't know? So what he told me to do was he says, you sing, I'll listen. And when I hear you creating a proper tone, I'm going to stop you. And I want you to think about what that felt like when you produced that tone. Memorize the sensation and reproduce the sensations, which will then reproduce the tone. See how that works? So if we can feel what it's like when we're producing a tone correctly as in vocalization, then we just keep reproducing that sensation and it will automatically reproduce the right tone. Going to be doing the same sort of thing here. We need to know what it feels like when our Enneatype is kicking in so that we can know that it's in operation or when it's on autopilot. And then we're going to be able to feel a different way when we move beyond it. And it's kind of like we're going to come at it sort of sideways, indirectly, by using the sensations of what it feels like to ground us so we can actually trust what's going on. Because when you're dealing with something that's largely unconscious, it's really sneaky. How do you focus on it? How do you do anything with something that by definition is beyond your reach? This is how it's going to work to a certain extent. Okay. Any thoughts, questions, comments? You guys are so
So
quiet
it
tonight.
sounded like, if I'm following you, Dave, correctly, that the feel like is really growing our body awareness of where our feelings are lodged in us,
Hmm.
or our throat's tightening, or our heart is beating fast, or our breathing stops, or is that what you're pointing to?
Sure, it's going to be the sum total of the sensations, what you feel like when you are moving into these various energies.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's what we're looking at. Yeah, it's going to be the sum total of all. Let's read this next paragraph, Judy, and see if this helps. He says, first of all, there's a big difference between knowing my type and feeling it leap into action. To know my type, I only have to learn and remember a number. I'm a 6. I know that because it was one of the high numbers on the test I took. The people interviewed on the 6 panel seemed the most like me, and my teacher thought it was a good fit. I can know my type without really understanding anything more. But to feel my type going into action is much more complicated. It involves looking for something called your passion, which at the beginning of the search is more or less completely unconscious. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the passions, which are the 9 negative sides, what we normally look at as negative sides of the Enneatype. What does that feel like? So if you're a 6, what's your passion as a 6?
Thanks.
Anybody remember?
Thanks.
Well, it's going to be fear, right?
Yeah, right.
If you look at the next page, just sneak by the next page, right there in the middle of the page, you can see the 9 types and the 9 passions.
Mm,
So if you're feeling anger, Judy, then as a 1, you're
mhm.
knowing that you're moving into this is what it feels like for your Enneatype to be kicking into action and
Right.
all of the sensations of anger, whatever they happen to be. Sometimes we
Mhm.
don't even know we're angry, just like
Yeah.
especially with fear. And he's going to bring this out in the paragraph as well. You say, trying to categorize someone as fearful, and they don't see it. They don't feel like they're afraid. But there's a
Mhm.
combination of sensations, and the way that they act out their experiences and their reactions is all fear-based.
Mm,
But we have to learn that. We have to start putting all that together. And that set of sensations that come along with the fear or the anger or the pride or whatever it happens to be are the things that we need to become familiar with, kind of
mhm.
memorize so that we know when we're kicking into, or I should say the Enneatype is kicking in. And then we can become aware enough in real time to make a different choice.
Mhm.
Otherwise, that feeling, that sensation is just going to have its way with us and the tail will wag the dog right into repeatable patterns. So the 9 passions. Each type has a passion, sometimes called a vice. The passion is the emotional energy that drives the type. Okay, there's your big definition you can put on the fridge. The passion is the emotional energy that drives the type. One can think of it as the felt distillation of a certain form of energy, yin, yang, or reconciling through a certain center of experience, body, heart, or head. Okay, now, that's a big sentence, may not have meant a whole lot to you. First of all, let's think about what distillation is. If you distill something, what are you doing? You know, you're separating one thing from another. So if you're going to get distilled water, you boil the water, and since the water has a higher, or I should say a lower boiling point than some of the sediment or other things that are impurities in the water, then the water is going to boil off, turn into vapor, and then you can let it cool, usually through those circular tubes. And then all the other stuff is going to be, the impurities are going to be left at the bottom. If you're doing a still and you're distilling alcohol, it's the same thing. You heat up the fermenting mixture, and the alcohol has a lower boiling point, and so it turns into vapor and comes off as pure alcohol, and all the sludge is left behind. So what he's talking about here is the distillation of a certain form of energy, yin, yang, or reconciling through a certain center of experience, body, heart, or head. And so we're going to be distilling this energy as it comes in, whatever energy we're particularly using, through whatever center of experience that we typically inhabit, and coming out with this energy. Since it is a part of the structure rather than the content of the type, the passion usually operates outside of conscious awareness. Now, this goes back to what he was talking about also in the introduction, is that there's a difference, he says, between the structure and the content. The structure are those unconscious programs that are giving rise to the content in our personality. So the structure are those programs that we are not aware of. The content are the unique traits of our personality that we can actually describe. So the content is associated with the me, right? The structure is deeper. It's also associated with the me, but at the unconscious level. So since it's part of the structure, this energy, rather than the content of the type, the passion usually operates outside of conscious awareness. The passions form early in childhood as babies discover that their original energy, that pure energy, you can almost think of it as the white light coming from the sun, and then it goes into a prism and is broken down into the rainbow colors. So that original energy is too much for their caregivers to support and nourish. They find they must limit and clamp down on that energy so they can stay in relationship with the adults who care for them. That's exactly the shadow, what we were just talking about with the shadow. They must limit and clamp down. The original energy is too much for the caregivers to support and nourish. Doesn't mean that the energy is bad. It just means they can't deal with it, and so they clamp down on it. That willful child that we talk about, that's going to serve, that energy is going to serve an adult very well in the material world. But as a child, it's a pain in the butt to try to parent. And so it's clamped down on. And so the child realizes you got to limit that energy so that they can stay in relationship with the adults who care for them. They do so by relying more and more on one form of life energy and one center of processing experience. And so in that distillation process, in that limiting process, it starts to filter down more and more to one form of energy that seems to work best and one center of experience that seems to work best. The Enneagram calls this constricted versions of that original energy, or shadow versions of that original energy, the 9 passions. Corresponding to each passion is the type's virtue, which is the unconstricted version of the passion. In this section, we will focus on the passions. If you have read other books about the Enneagram, you already know that the 9 passions are those nasty words placed at the head of the description of each Enneatype as follows. And so we've got 1 through 9, anger, pride, vainglory, envy, avarice, fear, gluttony, lust, and sloth. You probably recognize them as the 7 deadly sins plus 2. You may want to consult Appendix B for the story behind these names. We've already done that. See, you're ahead of the game here. Given that the names for the passions are so ancient, we need to interpret them for our modern ears if we're to find them useful. And especially since, it says the passions are not sins in the sense that we were taught as children. That's so important for us to understand because we are thinking of sins as unlawful behavior. If something is unlawful, if it's against God's law, God's instruction, it's rebellious sin. That's not what we're talking about here. He says, rather, they are qualities that impede personal development and spiritual growth. And then in parentheses, this happens to be the original definition of sin before it was corrupted. And we've talked about this before too. The original idea of sin was simply missing the mark of the wholeness of who we are, or the wholeness of God's oneness and connection. Anything less than that is missing the mark. And so these are the energies, these are the qualities in us that force us to miss the mark. We're missing the wholeness of who we are. We're missing the wholeness of the connection that we can have with another person or with God and God's presence. But they're not willful, conscious, unlawful transgressions in the way we typically think of sin, although that could be an output of all of this. Anger, the passion of type 1, does not mean a propensity for mayhem. It amounts to an unconscious internal stand against reality the way that it is. We talk about this all the time, don't we? That the 2 things that we need to live a successful life is the ability to accept life on life's terms and also to live with a sense of hope and gratitude. If we can do those 2 things, we're going to be living a grateful life. and the ability to be completely present in that life. So this anger isn't just meaning that you're going to be beating people up and causing fights and mayhem and all that. It's an urgency to judge and to criticize, born of an unexamined belief that when the Godhead created the universe, she or he somehow goofed. Life isn't the way it's supposed to be. Something's wrong. If we can't accept life on life's terms and see that the world is the way that it's supposed to be for us to be able to complete our purpose here as human beings, then we're always going to be at odds with pretty much every moment of our lives. We're going to be consummate and perpetual victims because life is always going to be treating us unfairly. We're going to be mistrustful of God because God somehow either screwed this up or is allowing it to be continuing in its corrupted form. See how this works. The passion for type 2, pride, is the unconscious gratification created by a conviction that only I can do it, that they are all depending on me, for only I know what is needed and how to give it effectively. So pride isn't just conceit. It isn't just, feeling that you're better. This can be so unconscious that you don't even really know that you're doing it. But an unconscious gratification created by this conviction that only I can do it and everyone's depending on me. Only I know what is needed, how to give it effectively. Vainglory, type 3's passion, is felt as a pressure to be always in action and visible in the eyes of others, grounded in an unconscious belief that my personal worth resides in what I do rather than who I am. It creates the false conviction that I alone am the author of my life. And so when we talk about people who boast are really covering up an insecurity, well, it's the same thing that he's saying here. My only worth resides in what I can do, not who I am. There's that basic insecurity that who I am is not enough. What I am is not enough. I'm going to have to prove myself somehow. Envy, type 4's passion, is an unconscious indulgence in the bittersweet feeling that others always have more goods, more success, more friends, and more love. It is rooted in a conviction that they have more than I, because at some deep level, they are something that I am not. It is often covered up by a tendency to publicly denigrate those same goods and qualities as ordinary and unimportant. There's a phrase for that. Anyone know the phrase? If you have a tendency to publicly denigrate the same goods and qualities as ordinary and unimportant that you really want yourself. Do you remember the Aesop's fable? Sour grapes. Am I the only one who knows about sour grapes? Oh, man.
I was muted there, but I would have gotten that.
Aesop's fables are always animals. I can't remember what the animal was. Was it a fox?
It was
or
the fun.
a fox?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he can't reach the grapes that he really wants, and he's jumping and jumping and trying to get there. And he walks away sullenly, and he says, "Oh, those grapes are probably sour anyway." Yeah. So that's what's going on here. Sour grapes. You're feeling that everybody has what you don't have, and deep down, there's probably a reason for that. I'm just not as good as they are. I don't have what they have. And there's that basic insecurity still at the root of everything. And so a way around that, a way to kind of save yourself, is to denigrate and sour grape the thing that you know that you really want and need. Avarice, type 5's passion, is a felt need to carefully guard my time and space against the intrusion of others, based upon the unconscious belief that they will absorb my energy and leave me depleted if I let them. Fear, type 6's passion, is a deep mistrust of just about everything, based on the unexamined belief that I am too weak and too unskilled to react successfully to life out of my own internal reserves. I kind of read that weird, but an examined belief that I am too weak and too unskilled to react successfully to life out of my own internal reserves. Again, I'm not enough. I don't have what it takes. Type 7's passion, gluttony, is a longing to savor all the pleasures that life has to offer, based upon an unconscious conviction that any pain, no matter how small, will lead to total disaster. Uh, you see how all of these are based on unconscious drives. Lust or excess, and it's not just about sex. The passion for type 8 is unconscious pleasure sought in pure arousal, resulting in a tendency to overdo everything: food, sex, money, speed, work, and to always be pushing the envelope just to see how far it can travel. And finally, type 9's passion of sloth is indulgence in unconsciousness itself, a kind of personal and spiritual sleepiness that leads to a neglect of what is most important to one's development. Wow, huh? Anybody seeing themselves in any of that?
No,
Yeah,
I don't get it. We have all those.
we're all messed up.
We all have anger and lust and uh, pride
What
and
is the primary way? Remember, Ellen? Yes, we're all going to have parts of these, but what is the primary way that you normally process? That's what we're talking about. That's what we're looking at. And then we want to be able to know what it feels like when our Enneatype is kicking in. So if you're feeling the fear kicking in, if you're feeling the anger kicking in, the pride kicking in, what does that feel like? And to become aware of those sensations so that in real time you can start to know you're back on the automatic track, you're back on autopilot, unless you make a conscious decision in another direction. Is that helping at all, Ellen?
well, I can see where yeah, perfectionist has anger because then you say, oh, I didn't do that right. Oh my gosh, I'm sure, or she didn't do that right. But I can see that also in well, eight, I have it as protector or challenger, that sense of strong sense of justice, where there's anger that drives you. And then there's
Right.
also the well, skeptic, not so much anger, but more of perceiving things and saying, well, that can't be right. You know, that skeptic thinking, but it drives that thinking.
Yeah, I think the anger will show up for all of the different Enneagram types in slightly different ways. Like I think the anger, like the way you describe the perfectionist, the anger is turned inward, which is always looking at themselves with this judgmental, critical eye, and it will
Right.
be this constant source of frustration when I am falling short of my internal standards, whatever that might look like. Whereas, like for a type 2 on the Enneagram, the giver, the anger might be triggered from their pride. Like when their pride gets hurt. Let's say they give somebody something and it's not appreciated, or they don't get the gratitude or response they expect. That might hurt their pride and then trigger anger there, right? And it's each of the different types. It's We'll still have anger, but the underlying reason for the anger will vary based on the different types, I think.
Mhm. I mean, one can say that all of this is going to be the result of fear at some level, right?
Yeah.
It's all fear.
Right.
But for 6, the fear is going to be more pronounced in a specific way. You know, anger can be the secondary emotion for many of these, as William is saying, but
Hmm.
it's got a special place in the heart of you ones out there. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
but what we're trying to identify is what is the center of the way we approach life? What's the center of the way that we process our experiences? And see if we can start to ascertain that. As we said, it's not going to be neat and clean with very defined edges. You know, it's going to be a messier process. But if we're really paying attention to ourselves, if we really are becoming more and more aware and conscious, um, I think there'll be something that will come to the fore that we'll see in ourselves. You know, just kind of like with the DISC system. Are you more dominant? Are you more an influencer? Are you more concerned with security? Or are you more concerned with details and conscientiousness? Like the 4 ways that I talk about in the 5th way. Do you typically yield Do you influence or manipulate? Do you exit? Do you destroy? How do you deal with the challenges that you face in life? I think we're
Mhm.
going to see that we do have a dominant way of dealing with those. And that's what we're talking about here. It doesn't mean that, there aren't wings and edges and things that we're also straying into. But that dominant one is the one that we're trying to ascertain. Oh, we lost Ellen right in the middle of still answering her question.
Uh,
Dave, may I ask a question?
Sure.
I haven't reviewed Appendix B for a while, but it's curious to me that anger and fear are the only emotions in this list of passions.
hmm.
And since,
Well, they're
oh,
also drives, though. We're looking at them more as a drive than an emotion.
yeah, that's
Right.
kind of where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
But based on the comment that you just made, it's like anger and fear are always part of it. You know,
Right. Right. Well, fear is at the bottom of everything. And when we talk about some of these as being various ways of looking at personal insecurity, well, what's at the root of insecurity? Well, it's a fear. It's a fear that we're not enough. It's a fear that we're not going to be accepted. It's a fear that we're going to be, left without a chair when the music stops, and all of those kind of things. There's going to be that fear. It's different if you say, well, as a two, I'm the only one who can do this. Everyone's depending on me. I'm the only one who really understands this. So that sounds like the opposite of an insecurity, but it's still going to be based in a fear that you can't really um, get it all done. A fear that people aren't going to recognize the superior idea or intellect that you have or ability to take care of things. There's always a fear in there that's driving anything that's not completely free and unlimited. And so we're trying to move past the fear. Scripture tells us the only thing that's going to cast out the fear is perfect love. When we move into that place of pure connection, yeah, then the fear goes away, at least in the real-time experience of it. But then typically it's going to return again as we start thinking about it. So the fear is there driving a lot of the stuff, but the way that it filters through, I think the distinctions can be helpful. Maybe not completely definitive, but they can be helpful as we're trying to work through our spiritual development. If we can start to understand the way that we tick, how we typically work, and what that feels like, that's going to help us in real time to make different decisions.
I feel like pride is also kind of at the base of everything as well, in a lot of ways.
I was going back to the top of page 38, um, where he's saying that the passions form early in childhood as babies discover that their original energy is too much for their caregivers to support and nourish. Um, I've always thought of this as the exact opposite, where the the child is, it sounds like he's saying that the parents are having a reaction to the child versus the child having a reaction to the parent. Am I reading that incorrectly?
I think it's pretty much a very dynamic and synergistic relationship. They're reacting to each other, you know, kind of oscillating back and forth. Chicken and egg. I don't know what starts it, right?
Yeah, because I'm thinking of like that kind of withdrawing energy. Like I'm having a hard time, like I forget which one it was, the yin energy, which is the withdrawing energy, or is that yang? I think
No,
yang.
that's yin. Hmm.
Yang is the
Yin.
withdrawing. The I'm having a hard time reconciling that with my caregivers, finding it. Okay, hold on. I think I'm answering my own question here.
Oh, do tell.
Um, like the way that's written, it sounded like basically the caregivers found the kids intensity too much to support and nourish, right?
Well, it could
Yeah.
be the other way around. Suppose you got a small male child who is more yin energy, more
Mhm.
withdrawn, maybe has more, I don't know, feminine qualities, more of a Jacob rather than an Esau, and the father is coming down on that child, wanting him to be, more of a football player type and more
Right.
interested in and so that relationship, depending on what energy you bring to the table, if it's not appreciated, accepted, encouraged or rewarded, then that's something that we're going to want to repress and try to project something else.
Right.
Not
Mm,
only that, if you're a strong-willed baby, I mean, it will be suppressed.
Of course, that's the
mm,
yang energy that William was talking about. Yeah, so that
mm,
strong-willed child, yeah, you're going to have to clamp down on that
And
kid.
yeah. And then you want to please your parents, so you do what's pleasing.
mm,
Exactly.
And
That's
you
the
don't get, yeah.
projection.
Same with in school too, right?
Exactly. Or church,
You
or
conform
any group
or
that we
church.
find ourselves in,
And that's when we conform. We become conformists.
because we want to be accepted.
Survival too, right? Like, I mean, it's how we survive.
Mhm.
Yeah. To survive too, yeah.
And so the more dysfunctional the family is, the more chaotic the family is, the more pronounced these unconscious programs, these energies are going to be, because the child has to go to greater and greater lengths in order to be able to survive, in order to be able to find areas that they can at least control some quiet corner in their life and feel like they can have any kind of breathing space. So it's the more dysfunctional the family, the more work there's going to be to do as the adult to try to get back to some kind of balance. Making sense?
mhm.
Okay, back to page 39. As you can see, the passions do not place very high on the scale of desirable human qualities. Perceiving them in action generates sufficient self-criticism that most people avoid noticing them. That's a big piece of this. We don't want to see them. We don't want to think of ourselves anywhere on that scale of 9 passions. You know, as probably a 5, I don't like to think of myself as greedy, as avaricious. That's ew. So if I'm trying to become aware of that and seeing that in action, that's going to put all sorts of guilt trips on me, right? That's going to be all sorts of recriminations. If Becky was here, she'd be talking about the self-critic inside. And so that's a painful process. Much easier just to avoid them altogether, to pretend that they're not there, not go through this difficulty of digging down. Peter Gabriel had a song, Digging in the Dirt, Find the
Mhm.
places where I got hurt, you know? And the whole song is about the psychological process of digging in the dirt and bringing all this icky stuff up that nobody wants to disturb. But
Like,
this is the whole purpose of having a type. A type is simply a collection of habits that more or less guarantees that you will not consciously experience your particular passion. That's cool, right? A type is a collection of habits that more or less guarantee that you will not consciously experience your particular passion. That's why he's looking at it as the guardian. Is that the word he used? The guardian of the Enneatype? Protector of the ego.
Mhm.
The ego is being protected. That view that you have of yourself without looking at those passions or those vices, the Enneatype is helping the ego protect that by keeping you unconscious, unaware of your particular passion. You're not going to experience that because the type is going to guard you from it. Whenever you engage in the habitual preoccupations of type, whenever you engage in the habitual preoccupations of type, you will probably be spared the unpleasantness of recognizing that you are indulging in anger, pride, vainglory, envy, greed, fear, gluttony, lust, or sloth. And that feels good, which is why learning to feel your type in action is so hard. perceiving it will at first make you feel worse. This is the basic reason why type is so stable throughout the lifespan. The more skillful type's activity becomes, the less you experience the passion that fuels it. Let's make it a little bit more concrete. I'm a 6, and my passion is fear. If you had asked me 40 years ago whether or not I was a fearful person, I would have said, of course not. I would have explained to you that I was a careful person, one who thought and analyzed and required evidence. Where is the fear in that? But let's make the example even more realistic. 40 years ago, I might not have answered your question with any directness. As soon as you asked it, I would have wondered why you were asking me if I was afraid. Let me see that again. As soon as you asked it, I would have wondered why you were asking me if I was afraid. What were you trying to do? And without thinking, I would have come up with an answer that changed the subject to something else. The entire response would have emerged so quickly and smoothly that the tiny moment of fear when you first asked me the question would never have appeared in my consciousness. This is how type successfully prevents a person from experiencing a passion that runs his life, but which he has been avoiding for years. Type is so well practiced and so well honed that it just does its job without us needing to think about it. This is why Gurdjieff, who reintroduced the Enneagram to Europe in the early 20th century, called type a form of falling asleep. Did his story there, his illustration, did that help in terms of the point that he's trying to get across?
When it came to my passion as a type 9 on the Enneagram, and the passion is sloth, um, I was acutely aware of that at a very early age. And in fact, it was when I was first introduced to the Enneagram, soon as they talked about sloth, like I knew right away, like, okay, that's me. Um, and so I respect the way he's presenting it here, but I would imagine the same is true for like perfectionists and anger, and maybe pride is a little bit more deceptive in terms of recognizing it, but I don't agree that all the types passions would be that well hidden uh, from their consciousness.
Well, maybe you were just an old soul, William, much more aware
They,
at an
they
earlier
say
age.
all nines are like, since we've been around the entire circle, right? Like we're more evolved spiritually.
Ooh, ah,
Yeah.
that's a nice way to think of yourself. Nice PR
Right.
stunt there.
Well, I can play the other side of that, William, because when I first heard that, and I didn't really understand a lot about the passions in the beginning, when I first heard that a 9 was associated with sloth, I was offended by that. And my first thought was, are they telling me I'm lazy? What are they saying to me? So, but now in reading about it more and understanding kind of that ability to sort of just check out when you kind of want to, I can see it, and I can observe myself doing it sometimes too in certain circumstances. So it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Would you say that you were aware of that as a child, as William says he was?
No, not so much. I don't think.
Mhm.
Well, I had the luxury of having parents who would tell me I was lazy right from the gate. My dad used to say, like I was born like a month and a half post mature. So my dad would say, I was lazy to born and I was lazy ever since. So that so once I didn't have any difficulty recognizing that as a character trait, even though I might have found it offensive on some level.
So did
Uh,
that cause you to work harder? Did that cause you to not procrastinate, to please your
maybe
parents?
maybe sometimes. I think it showed up it shows up in different areas. Like it showed up like doing better academically and things like that, but it didn't always show up with keeping my room clean or things like that. Um, so yes and no.
Mhm.
Mm.
I think also, like for me, going back to how much does attachment styles play into this? Also, trauma. So for me, the slothy part of it was as a child, I learned to dissociate, so I learned how to check out. It was a coping mechanism for me, and it followed me all throughout my life. So what influenced that? It's kind of like that energetic thing
Mm.
of how we develop into and engage with our types, how that
Mm.
gets evolved.
Yeah,
Danielle, do you consider yourself a 9?
That's how I tested, and I really resonate with it. Yeah,
Okay, okay,
yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
yeah, what I was going to say in response to that is sometimes, the nines aren't necessarily lazy, but they might invest their energy in unimportant things,
Yep.
right? Like they might invest their energy in things that are not going to move the needle in any meaningful way. And so like when I got a PhD in, like I graduated a doctoral program. Like, yeah, I don't think you can be lazy and do that, but it was compartmentalized laziness, I think.
But if you think of what's primarily driving the 9, isn't it avoidance of conflict?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see where procrastination comes into that. You can see where hanging back and not pushing the envelope, and it comes from you don't want to put yourself in the position where, you're making a strong statement necessarily, that one that can invite criticism or invite any kind of conflict. So it's really more of that than laziness,
Mm.
Sloth may be the ultimate result. It looks like sloth because nothing's getting done, but it's
Right.
not laziness. It may not even be lack of ambition
Mm.
or initiative. It's this wanting to avoid conflict, being on the front edge of things.
Mhm.
And then back to the anger piece too. There's definitely an anger piece with a
Mhm.
nine because nines tend to go along with to avoid the conflict and just, agree in senses. And then there's this underlying resentment. And then you get this passive aggressive behavior. And I have seen that. I've caught myself in that a couple times too. So I can tell when I'm feeling angry about something because I'm going along too much and now I have to just stop and I
Mhm.
pull back. So yeah, I can pick up on that piece too.
Mhm. And sometimes the anger can surprise you. Like it'll pop out and you didn't even realize it's percolating.
It's percolating.
Oh,
Well,
little sloppies.
I initially tested as a 9, was it 10 years ago or whatever, when we started messing around with the Enneagram. Nina said immediately that I wasn't a 9, but I certainly have some attributes that resonate. And one of them is, I don't like conflict. Even if I'm watching a movie and you have one of those uncomfortable family dinners or something where it's like I just want to it's hard for me to just sit still and watch that. I want to get up and walk out of the room. It's like I don't need this, especially in a movie. Enough of that in real life. But I don't like that. I don't like that. And yet, here as a pastor, especially teaching the way I teach, I put myself right in the crosshairs of that kind of conflict. And I've accepted it as part of the gig, but yeah, I don't like it. And so I guess I'm a 5, because that fits certain other aspects, but kind of like Ellen's pointing out, it's not all cut and dried like that.
Mhm.
Okay, well, this is kind of the foray into helping us to identify what the types feel like. And this is a very practical section of the book where we're really looking at, okay, what does it feel like? How can we do something about it in real time once we become aware enough? What were those 3 things? What does it feel like? Recognizing when type is going into action, when it's kicking in, when we're being triggered into it. when it's on autopilot, and then what we can do when that happens. So this is getting practical with our types. Now that we've gone through the 3 centers of experience and the 3 types of energy that we use, that prism that kind of distills the light into separate colors, separate enneatypes from the infant into the adult. Now, what do we start to do about it? And so this is an interesting section as well.
I want to comment about, so I tested initially as challenger, an 8, protector, challenger, strong sense of justice. So it says here, the 8, what does it say? The passion is lust or excess. I understand excess is too much, but to me, lust, like, because I remember there's a book about Van Gogh called Lust for Life, and I'm challenging. I say, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Right? The lust for life.
Yeah, for the 8s, the challenger, it's a lust for intensity,
Yeah,
like rich foods and
the
rich
experience, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And sex can be part of that when we think of lust in the biblical way. But
Yeah.
But there's a shadow to that, right?
Yeah,
Right.
if it's excess or you overdo it or it
How does it, is that, if you're identifying with that, what do you think? How does the shadow piece of it show up for you?
so sometimes on my days off and I have nothing to do, I will watch YouTube for hours. And I say, oh my gosh, I've been sitting here for hours. I
Mhm.
could have done other things.
Mhm.
But I watched a comedy, it's funny, and I read or listen to podcasts, it's pretty good.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't see anything bad about it other than I could have done other things.
Yeah,
But I
I
would,
don't think it's good or bad. I don't think
yeah.
we're
I mean,
talking
I
Well,
would,
it
any of
can
this.
be. I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem. But this is part of what this process of self-awareness is all about. Finding out where it becomes a problem, where it becomes self-limiting, where you're starting to use it as a drug, as anesthetizing some of the things that you're not ready and willing to deal with in life. That's what you need to figure out.
Mm,
That's what you need to determine. Lust in and of itself, like Daniel says, it's not bad. We want to have, lust in terms of really want to desire most out of life. But where is it becoming a coping mechanism? Where is it becoming limiting? That's what you need to figure out. Where is that line for you? You know, one
I
day
think,
binge watching is not a problem necessarily, 6 or 7 days a week. Well, now it's a problem. And you got to make that determination of where that line is. And that's what this whole
right.
process is about.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
And
think what my guideline is if it interferes with life, with work, with yeah.
Degree of impairment.
Yes.
Yeah, if it interferes. And then the other one is type 5, because I also tested as a type 5. My passion is avarice, and I can see it says here, carefully guard my time and space against intrusion of others. And I do guard my time. Like I never have my work interfere with my personal life ever.
Mm.
There's a definite line. I don't take it home if I
Well,
can
just
help it.
make sure that what you're calling virtue isn't really limiting you and compromising your relationships and your ability to be present or to accept life on life's terms and live with hope and gratitude. If it's not doing any of those things, then you don't have a problem.
Mm,
It's just like dealing with alcoholics who don't admit that they're alcoholics. It's like, okay, if there's not a problem with your drinking, then it's not a problem. But
mm,
be honest, is it a problem? Even if it doesn't fit the classic patterns of alcoholic drinking, which there really isn't one. There's all sorts of different types. But you got to be honest with yourself, brutally honest with yourself, if we're really going to walk down this path of spiritual development. So that's what this is all about. I didn't even realize we lost Scott somewhere along the way, didn't we? So,
He's down there.
I'm here.
oh,
I'm here.
I'm looking at myself. That's why I'm not seeing Scott.
Mm,
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's time. So, Scott, it's over to you, buddy.
You got it. Father God, we're grateful to be here with you and enjoy this learning that we're taking in. And there's a lot of things to learn that are way beyond what we think is going on in our lives. And so we read and we share and we grow and we find new ways to celebrate you in our lives. So we're grateful for the way you love us, Lord. And we're grateful to be friends and extended family and just the connections that are made. And they give us strength and encouragement. So, Lord Jesus, we love you and we praise you and we do it all in your holy name. And that's all we got for you tonight, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
That's it.
All right.
I was wondering, did I do something wrong there? You guys are all hanging there. And,
Well, you have a standard way of typically ending your prayers, and we didn't hear it. The Pavlovian response did not kick in, buddy. What can I tell you?
yeah.
Thanks for that. Okay, we're done
stretching.
here tonight. If you're in the local area, don't forget that Friday night is Three Kings. So we're going to be having potluck dinner and White Elephant gift exchange. So Kat, come on down, dear. You know, we expect to see you.
I'll try my best.
All right. All right. And then the rest of you will see you on Sunday, and we will be streaming on Sunday. So maybe we'll see you on the little screen, or at least you'll see us.
Yes.
But have a great rest of the week.
You got it, guys. Take care.
Good night. Good night.
Aho, everyone.
Aho.
Bye.
Good night. Bye,
Good night.
Jordan.
Good night.
I'll see you next week. I won't be there on Sunday, so I'll see you next Tuesday and Wednesday and then Sunday for sure next week.
Okay.
But
Okay.
not this Sunday.
Okay.
Okay, Jordan.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Have fun at the birthday party, Jordana.
Yeah.
I'll try.
Oh. 92? That's pretty
No,
cool.
95.
Oh my gosh, even better. All
She's
right.
gonna be 95, and then Darren just lost his grandma yesterday, so we're
Okay.
trying to move him through that whole escapade too. So,
Have a good time, dear.
all right, love
All
you.
right. Bye-bye.